Good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Qin Gao. I'm a faculty member of the Columbia University Weatherhead East Asian Institute. I'm also the director of the China Center for Social Policy at Columbia. On behalf of these two institutions at Columbia, I welcome you to the second lecture in our annual lecture series on the title of COVID-19 Governance and Impacts, China from Comparative Perspectives. This series is part of a Luz Foundation supported project called the China COVID Project. Our aim is to document history, stimulate analysis, and build a scholarly consortium where scholars, students, anyone who is interested in this topic could come together to join forces, learn from each other, share research, and engage in conversations. So today it's my great honor to welcome Professor Ziying You from University of Georgia to give us a book talk. Professor You is Associate Professor of Comparative Literature and Intercultural Studies there. She has published in many journals and several books. Today, she will really showcase her new book, which will explore how Chinese and Chinese American women in the US responded to the dual crisis of COVID-19 and anti-Asian racism. Her book is amazing. I've heard a lot about her excellent work, and it's so stimulating and inspiring. So I welcome you to join us. Professor Yu will present for about 40 to 45 minutes, followed by a Q&A with the audience members. So I urge you to enter your questions in the Q&A box anytime throughout this program, and we will turn to your questions toward the end. Thank you so much. And Professor Yu, I turn it over to you. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Professor Gao Qin, for your wonderful introduction. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here and for your support. So I will share my PowerPoint. Share. Okay. So my book is open access monograph. It's freely available to read online. So this is the link to the new book. So feel free to read it online. So probably you all may remember what happened in early 2020. So the COVID-19 broke out in China in early 2020 or late 2019. So on January 23rd, 2020, Wuhan was in lockdown. It never happened before in public human history. And also on March 11th, 2020, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 as a global pandemic. So many countries and nation states started to be locked down. In the US, the President Trump declared a national emergency on March 14th, and then schools were closed. Public places and facilities were closed too. I think, like for myself, I had to stay at home with my two young little kids. My son Lucas was 5 years old. My daughter April was 2 years old. It was definitely a very challenging time for everyone. In addition to the COVID-19 pandemic, we as Asian people, we also faced rising anti-Asian racism and hate incidents. It was definitely a very dark moment in human history. So my son Lucas draw this picture. In the whole book, I only included two pictures. This is one of them. My father named this picture as Split. I think it represented my experiences and feelings really well during the COVID-19 pandemic. I felt that I was split within different words. And also I feel that the society was split. For my new book, I focus on some core research questions, including how have Chinese and Chinese American women experienced and responded to the multiple crises of the COVID-19 pandemic and racism? How has the global pandemic changed their everyday lives identities, and foodways. I focus on diverse Chinese and Chinese American women groups and communities, especially Chinese immigrant mothers, women international students, transracial adoptees, and lay Buddhist women. I highlight their lived experiences of racism, marginalization, resilience, and resistance. Theoretically, I integrate the frameworks of decolonizing, feminist, and anti-racist approaches. I think decolonization means different things to different people. Here, I'm using the feminist decolonizing approaches. Especially, I focus on those marginalized voices of Chinese American women. So, in the whole book, I tried to let those women speak for themselves, articulate their feelings and experiences, and also make collect I also let them tell their own stories of how they work together to make social changes. This is a table of content of my new book. So in the new book there are 7 different chapters. The first chapter presents all the important theoretical frameworks, including global Asian folklore studies, integrated feminisms, and anti-Asian racisms. Chapter 2 focuses on the stories and voices of Chinese immigrant mother. Especially, I emphasize how they build communities of support and practice political activism, especially how they advocate for the AAPI history bills during the pandemic. AAPI refers to Asian American and Pacific Island. Third chapter presents the stories of Chinese women international students and their transnational experiences during the pandemic. To return or to stay is always a challenging question for Chinese women international students. When they have to make their decisions have been restricted by geopolitics, economic situations in both China and the US, family situations, financial resources, their networks, personal choices, and so on. I think right now, as we all know, their choices have also been restricted by American government's immigration policies and visa policies. Chapter 4 focuses on the stories of Chinese adoptees. I highlight how they build anti-racist solidarities and remake their Chinese or Asian American identities. Chapter 5 tells the stories of Chinese lay Buddhist women. So in the chapter title, I use their own concept of going home. So as 睡莲 said in our interview, going home is a state of achieving enlightenment in Buddhism. So 睡莲 and many lay Buddhist women believe that everyone has the Buddha's nature. The moment is going home is the moment that they achieve enlightenment. So I definitely, this term definitely has very complicated religions and cultural meanings. Chapter 6 focuses on the fluid foodways of Chinese American women, with the focus on the intersection of race, gender, and food and identity and so on. And chapter 7 is the conclusion chapter. In particular, by the end of the book, I have a specific session called How Do We Want to Live? I think it's an open question. Nobody knows the answer, but I let my contributors articulate their own answers and responses. So, how do you want to live? This is a question for all of us. So first, for today's talk, I will mainly focus on my methodologies and also some key theoretical frameworks. And then I will focus on chapter 4 about the stories of the Chinese adoptees. It was really challenging to do research and to write this book, as the pandemic has affected almost everyone in the world. I think my study was only a drop in an ocean. In order to conduct research, I integrate virtual ethnography, narratives, interviews, personal narratives, class surveys, and social media analysis. For virtual ethnography, before the COVID-19 pandemic occurred, I often did ethnography in person. So I lived with the communities that I studied and participated in their activities. And also, I ate with them and lived with them. But during the COVID-19 pandemic, because of lockdowns and also travel bans or many other factors, I can only do ethnography online. So I mainly participated in many activities online, especially through Room and WeChat. And from 2020 to 2022, my collaborators, research assistants, and I conducted 86 interviews with different contributors. Their ages ranged from 18 years old to 65 years old. So I started my job at the University of Georgia last August. Before that, I worked as the chair and associate professor of Chinese at the College Wooster. So I taught food and religion in China and anti-Asian racism in the academic year of 2021 and 2022. So I did some class surveys and also shared my students' insights in the book. So finally, I used some social media analysis. So many people shared their personal stories on social media, especially on WeChat and Facebook. Some shared their pandemic diaries there. So I just used some public records to analyze the emerging common themes. So in the process of my research, some key questions emerged, including how did anti-Asian racism intensify during the COVID-19 pandemic? How did Chinese and Chinese American women cope with the multiple crises of the pandemic and racism, build communities of support, and fight for social justice? What agencies, solidarities, and strategies emerged or strengthened among them in the processes? In particular, I created the new term communities of support to describe how mutual support among Chinese and Chinese American women emerged or strengthened through coalitions and community building in response to the public health crisis, shared subjectivities, experiences of racism and marginalization, and collective actions to make social changes. This concept has been inspired by Leah Williams Weiz's term migrant maternal online communities, Valerie Francisco Manchevai's concept of communities of care, and Bell Hook's concept of community of resistance. In my own term, community of support, I really emphasize the role of support. And also, my focus is on specifically on Chinese and Chinese American women. So first, I would love to briefly introduce the three key theoretical frameworks of my new book: Anti-Asian Racism, Global Asian Folklore Studies, and Integrated Feminisms. Race and racism are key words in my new book. So I will start with the definitions. So here I use Michael Omi and Howard Wynot's definitions in their influential book Racial Formation in the United States. According to them, race, quote, is a concept that signifies and symbolizes social conflicts and interests by referring to different types of human bodies, quote ends. It is a social construct that differs by time and place and draws upon arbitrary criteria for categorizing people. It, quote, has been a master category, a kind of template for patterns of inequality, marginalization, and difference throughout U.S. history. No other social conflict, not class, not sex gender, not colonialism or imperialism, can ever be understood independently of it. Quote ends. According to them, racism, quote, creates or reproduces structures of domination based on racial significations and identities. Storehouse argued that we cannot understand racism as a general thing. There are multiple racisms which are always situated in particular social, economic, political, cultural, and historical contexts. These multiple racisms are all related but distinctive in their origins and contours. So in scholar studies, racisms are always white and black. So Chinese people were often excluded from the discourses about racisms. But I think the pandemic changed our views about racisms. The anti-Chinese and anti-Chinese racisms triggered by the coronavirus echo the long-standing issues of yellow perils and discrimination faced by Chinese and Asians in different parts of the world throughout the history of the Chinese and Asian diasporas. Columbia history professor Mei Nai argues that the Chinese questions the idea that the Chinese pose a racial threat to democracy and Euro-American civilizations have been reproduced again and again in different places and at different times. Although the Chinese questions originated in the late 19th century politics of racism, colonialism, and capitalism, they have been perpetuated in our own time with the intense competition between China and the West. So in the first chapter, I briefly presented the history of anti-Asian racism before the pandemic. I highlighted some key historical moments, especially the area of the Chinese Exclusion Acts. So the stories of Chinese immigrants immigrated to the U.S. often started with their stories in the golden rushes in California in the 1850s. So since the beginning, Chinese immigrants encountered violence and exclusion. On May 2nd, 1882, the first Chinese Exclusion Act was passed. Then the 1904 Act followed, and Chinese immigration became severely restricted in the U.S. During the Chinese exclusion era, when Chinese immigrants and also immigrants from other countries came to California, especially in San Francisco, they were sent to Angel Island. So they were detained there for several days, up to 2.5 years. Right now, the Angel Island became a historical museum. So there we can see like some exhibitions about this dark moment in history. So when some Chinese immigrants were detained in the Angel Island, some wrote Chinese poems on the walls. So later, some Chinese and American scholars, they actually collected all the poems wrote on the walls and translated them into English. So it has so those writings have been published and became important documents about this dark moment. Another dark moment is the World War II Japanese American incarceration. During the Second World War, the Japanese armies attacked the U.S. Navy base in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, in December 1941. So after that, the American President Roosevelt issued an executive order to detain all the Japanese and Japanese American citizens. So they were given very short notices. So about 120,000 Japanese and Japanese American people were put into different concentration camps in very remote areas. Because they were given very short notices, they lost their homes, livelihoods, properties, and so on. Mina Okuba was one of those people. She was an artist. She studied at UC Berkeley, so she was also detained at one of the concentration camps. She used her arts and paintings to document what happened to Japanese and Japanese American people at the concentration camps. So later, the activists used the book and other sources to fight for social justice. They asked for apology and compensation from the American government. In the book, I also briefly discussed the myth of model minority. The myth of model minority emerged during the civil rights movement. It was used to contrast Asian Americans against other communities of color. Model minority was invented by white journalists. So they used these terms in mainstream media to highlight Asian Americans' success in education and work ethic as part of the American dream. So this label didn't bring any benefits to Asian and Asian American communities. It delegitimized centuries of systemic racisms and racist policies that shaped the experiences of all communities of color. In particular, it created hierarchies within groups and imposed unrealistic expectations on minorities. This label did not shade Asians and Asian Americans from racism. Instead, it exaggerated the polarization, interrelated racializations, and relational positioning among communities of color. So the anti-Asian racisms were exaggerated during the COVID-19 pandemic. In response to the alarming escalation in xenophobia and racism resulting from the pandemic, the Asian American and Pacific Islander, known as AAPI for short, Equity Alliance Chinese for Affirmative Action, and the Asian American Studies Department of San Francisco State University launched the Stop AAPI Hate, known as SAH, coalition on March 19th, 2020. So after its establishment, the center used the Google Forms to collect the anti-Asian hate incidents all over the US. So from March 19, 2020 to March 31st, 2022, a total of 11,467 hate incidents against the AAPI were reported. The number of hate incidents reported to SH represents only a small fraction of the total number of that occurred. So the Stop AAPI Hate Center released many important national reports. So this is the data from their national report released in July 2002. So according to this specific report, we can see that non-criminal incidents comprises the vast majority of the harmful hate acts that AAPI community members experience. Harassment is a major problem. 2 in 3 of nearly 11,500 incidents involved harassment, such as verbal or written hate speech or inappropriate gestures. AAPI individuals who are also female, non-binary, LGBTQIA+, and or elderly experience hate acts that target them for more than one of their identities at once. And 1 in 3 parents who participated in the Stop AAPI Hate Elderman Data Intelligence Survey were concerned about their child being a victim of anti-AAPI hate or discrimination in unsupervised spaces and on the way to school. So in Chapter 2, I highlighted the stories of Chinese and Chinese American mothers with other Asian American mothers. Because of their fear, they launched like statewide campaigns to advocate for AAPI history bills. Finally, hate, especially anti-Asian hate and racism, happen everywhere, in both large cities and small towns, in AAPI enclaves and in places where AAPI communities were few and far between. So for my own book, I used the data from Stop AAPI Hidden Center, but I also presented my contributors' own stories and voices. I tried to let them speak for themselves. So theoretically, I intended to define global Asian folklore studies. In particular, I intended to integrate the studies of global Asians and the new critical folklore studies to build global Asian folklore studies. So the studies of global Asians were promoted by Tina Chen at Pennsylvania State University with the well-known journal Voyager's Studies in Global Asians, and also promoted by Christina Yano, who was the president of the Association for Asian Studies during the pandemic. So right now, I think the global Asians have been a very well-known and influential framework for us to study, to integrate American studies, Asian American studies, and Asian diaspora studies. And for my frameworks of global Asian folklore studies, I also borrow many important research in new critical folklore studies. So my focus is really action based and future oriented. I think overall, I intend to make those marginalized AAPI voices visible. So here, AAPI refers to Asian American, and Pacific Island. So my older student at the College Wooster, Mochi, who is a Japanese American student, uh, they invented the term AAAPI, especially Mochi and their classmates organized the AAPI arts festivals at the college. So in the book, I use the term AAPI too. So I think I can use the missing stories and moving forward to analyze all my key themes in my book. It is also the same for the American Folklore Society's annual meeting this year. I was serving as on the organizing committee, so I definitely contributed to that common themes of missing stories and moving forward. So our focus, and my focus is really on the missing stories in our history and at the present. And also, I wanted to make those missing stories visible and make those voices heard. And in addition, when we restore those missing stories, we wanted to work together to move forward. Theoretically, when defining global Asian folklore studies, I emphasize the following approaches, including transnational, interdisciplinary, intersectional, and decolonial. In addition, I pay attention to the important role of the immigration and the important role of the digital technology in our world. Because of time limit, I will not go to details, but you can learn more about defining global Asian folklore studies in the first chapter. For the global Asian feminisms, I tried to integrate AAPI feminisms, women of color feminism, and transnational feminisms into this theoretical framework. I intend to challenging white feminist dominance and heteropatriarchy, and to build solidarities across racial and gender boundaries. I think in the political activism, I did see the integration of various forms of feminisms. So here, the global Asian feminisms was what I got from observing what happened on the ground. So now I will focus on the chapter 4, finally, on the stories of Chinese adoptees. Chinese adoptees are those people who were born in China but were adopted by different families abroad, especially in the US. Of course, they were also adopted to other Western countries, such as the UK, Australia, Canada, and so on. But my focus is on Chinese adoptees in the US. So in the US, most Chinese adoptees were adopted by middle class white American families, especially Christian families. So they were often, so those adoptees were often adopted when they were infants or babies. They were often raised in white dominated communities. So Chinese adoptees, this phenomenon was related to China's one-child policy implemented in 1979 to 2015. So when China implemented one-child policy, when some couples had more than one kids, sometimes they had to give up or abandon their actual kids, especially baby girls. So they were forced to put them in public spaces like in front of bus stations or train stations or in front of police stations, and then those some other people will pick them, send those abandoned babies to orphanages. So in the 1990s, international adoption programs were established in China. So many kids were adopted abroad. So about 85,000 Chinese adoptees were adopted to the US, mostly were girls. In addition to Chinese adoptees, in the US, there are also Korean adoptees, Vietnamese adoptees, and Filipino adoptees, and so on. So in the chapter, so I put the stories of Chinese adoptees in the transnational history of Asian adoption. So that history reflects US empire, militarism, and global adoption networks. So for this chapter, Zoe Simon is my superstar contributor. She was my student. She was my sophomore research assistant at the College of Worcester. So I never thought I would study Chinese adoptees, but Zoe definitely introduced me into this field. So she helped me recruit 26 Chinese adoptee participants on Facebook. So Chinese adoptees and other Asian adoptees formed various adoptee groups and communities online, both online and offline. So Zoe were part of those communities. So she just shared all the recruiting messages. So we got a really passionate response from Chinese adoptees. So from February to August 2021, we conducted semi-structured room interviews with participants. Each interview lasted between 1 and 2 hours. All those interviews were conducted in English and transcribed in English. So different from other chapters, like for one conducted interviews with Chinese immigrant mothers, international students, and labelist women. All the interviews were conducted in Chinese. But for Chinese adoptees, some were fluent in Chinese, but most of them couldn't speak Chinese well. So their first language, their mother tongue, was English. So most of them preferred to be interviewed in English. This is the list of the Chinese adoptee contributors. So during the time of interviews, their ages ranged between 18 years old and 30 years old. Most of our contributors were single college students or graduate students. So at the time of the interview, they lived or studied in different states in the US. Based on the interviews, some key themes emerged. So first, some adoptees felt the sense of coming out of the fog. It was the time of their awakening to adoption's impacts. And second, many adoptees experienced transracial adoption paradox. They feel that they have almost never fully accepted by American society. And also many experienced the strong sense of in-betweenness, which means neither fully white American nor Chinese or Asian. For many Chinese adoptees in the US, being Chinese and or Asian is to experience racism as a rite of passage. The moment that they come out of the fog is the moment they realize where they came from, who they are, and how adoption and racism have impacted their lives. So Helen articulated their feelings of coming out of the fog. In our interview, Helen said, they are bringing different perspectives from adopted people about their life circumstances. And for me, there's this term called the fog, which is the idea when adopted people start to understand how adoption impacts their life. Because I think before, when you are still in the fog, it's kind of this feeling of knowing you are adopted, or maybe even not knowing you are adopted and thinking that, oh, I am, but it has no impact on my life. But then coming out of the fog would be understanding your origins, your roots, being more curious about where you come from, really exploring how did the adoption work with the legal aspects of it, being curious about all that and really seeing some of the pitfalls and actually a lot of negatives within the adoption community. At the beginning of chapter 4, I used two key stories. One is from Carly, the other is from Zoe Simon, my superstar contributor. Carly was adopted from Hubei province. She was raised in Ohio by a white couple. In our interviews, Carly told me how she experienced microaggressions and stereotypes in elementary schools. It was really hard for her to find any role models until in high school she finally had one Chinese math teacher. So during the pandemic, she experienced anti-Asian racism, especially in our interview. She emphasized how Chinese various rhetoric exaggerated racism, and also Carly chose to turn to activism and solidarity to remake her own identities. For Zoe Samor, Zoe was adopted from Guangxi. She was raised by a white single mother who is a law professor at an R1 university. She was hospitalized during COVID and then turned to activism. So in my book, I told the stories of how Zoe co-led the March for Asian Lives with about 300 participants, and in the public speech, she shared her personal stories and gave a very powerful speech. And she said, "We are not a virus. Hatred is the only virus in this country." So 19 of our 26 adopted contributors gave accounts of racism and discrimination against them during the pandemic. And all of them were fully aware of the anti-Asian racism on media and social media. Racist incidents that they experienced occurred in many public and private settings, online and offline, and discrimination often came from strangers and acquaintances as well as friends and family members. So this is another quote from Emma. I will not read the whole quotation, but I would love to share some key words. So Emma said, I feel like it opened up a whole world to me, I guess. When the discrimination against Asians wrapped up due to COVID and the rhetoric around it, it really made me look into like being an adoptee, not just like an adoptee, but like a Chinese adoptee being adopted by someone who's white. She emphasized that that was the first time in my life that I felt unsafe due to my ethnicity. And she also emphasized that it's opened up a kind of worms and a Pandora's box. I think in my book, I intended to show that the different Chinese and Chinese American women groups and communities experienced anti-Asian racism in both similar and different ways. For some Chinese adoptees, their special experiences were that some of adoptees experiencing racism within their own adoptive families. So here I would like to share two stories from Mia and Emily. So Mia's pronouns are they, them, theirs. So Mia was adopted by a white American couple, and she realized many of their relatives were really racist. So they often joked with her when they met her, and it was really hard for Mia to stand those racist rhetorics. Mia tried to connect with other adoptees and Asians and studied Asian American history by themselves. Mia also tried to talk to their loved ones about racism, but it was too painful. Mia thought that in their family, their Asianness was erased. So Emily married with a white man, and then she felt unwelcome, especially with her white in-laws. Her husband is very supportive, but her in-laws often gave her very hard time. So no matter how Emily phrases what she wanted to say, her in-laws seemed unwilling to listen. They wanted her to say, "I'm white, I'm American." She just couldn't do that. Although they knew her as a family member, they were unwilling to learn and empathize. Emily also felt shocked to hear some anti-Chinese comments from her white adoptive dad, who adopted two Chinese girls. He expressed some anti-Asian sentiments for years, but she just brushed it off. It was not until the pandemic that Emily started to speak up and said to him, "That was not okay for you to say." Chinese adoptees had shared struggles during the pandemic. They experienced racism, and some experienced discrimination even from their own white adoptive families. Some experienced broken friendships and painful identity crises. Some experienced heightened sense of racial battle fatigue. So as Mia shared, they often had to educate their relatives, friends, and people about anti-racism. So it was really a long battle for them. So sometimes they felt burned out and exhausted. Chinese adoptees had really complicated agencies. Some adoptees thought that they had no agencies at all. They said the decisions about their lives were decided really early when they were adopted. And those decisions were made by international adoption agencies and also made by their adoptive families. So I think one adoptee said they had no agency in making their lives when they were simply shipped to the US. But in the chapter, I want to highlight that complicated agencies, especially I shared their actions of breaking silence and confronting racism. During the pandemic, or sometimes before the pandemic, they built adoptive networks, both online and offline, to advocate for API rights. They also worked with other marginalized groups. I really focus on their political activism, especially in fighting against anti-Asian racism. Atlanta spy shootings were a waking moment for many adoptees and also for many other Asian, Chinese, and Chinese American women. So in March 16th, 2021, a white man went to three Asian spas in Atlanta and killed 8 people. Among those 8 people, six were women, especially Chinese and Korean women. Some of those women were undocumented immigrants. So this crime really made many Chinese and Asian American communities angry. So they organized protests and rallies in almost every single state of the US. So in the book, I highlighted Zoe's story when she co-led the Margin for Asian Lives at the College Worcester. So Zoe worked with Coco New, an international student, and also with other Asian American students to co-led the March for Asian Lives. And she gave really powerful speeches at the march. So in her conclusion remarks, Zoe told the crowd that now is our time to start building a new future for us and our children. Things are not going to change overnight. One march and one speech won't change systems. It will take time and all of us working together. With the right people and the right stones, I believe we can begin to make this world a better place. So with the support of the Chinese American students, I designed and taught anti-Asian racisms, and also organized the API lecture series. So Moshi and their classmates organized the AAPI Arts Festivals. So despite the surging anti-Asian racism during the COVID-19 pandemic, Chinese adoptees and other Chinese American young adults built solidarities across AAPI and BIPOC communities. Here, BIPOC refers to Black, Indigenous people, Indigenous and people of color. So working together, they have challenged the model minority myths and make themselves visible. They also have remade their Chinese Asian American identities through activism and resilience. I want to emphasize their roles as cultural mediators, identity negotiators, and justice maker. In short, small acts of support ripple into lasting challenges. I know we are still in a very challenging time. I hope that we all can still keep our hope and work together to build a more just, inclusive, and compassionate society for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Yu. That was so powerful and inspiring. I want to let you know I actually met Zoe, your student,
Oh,
because she's now studying social work. So it's a beautiful connection. And again, I think you chose very wisely for today's talk to highlight this chapter, which really showcases these young people's courage and power for action. Amazing, very uplifting. Thank you so much.